My 5-year-old handed me a crayon drawing of our family the Tuesday after Labor Day, and standing in the pickup line outside her kindergarten classroom, I counted 4 people in it instead of 3. Mommy, Daddy, Lily, and a woman with red hair I had never seen in my life, standing exactly where a family member stands in a child's drawing, close enough to matter. I asked Lily, as calmly as I could manage with my heart already climbing into my throat, who that was. She looked up at me like it was the most obvious thing in the world and said, "That's Miss Sarah, Mommy. She sleeps at Daddy's office when I visit on Saturdays." I want to tell you how I got from that sentence, standing on a sidewalk in front of a school building with a paper princess backpack slung over my shoulder, to the end of a marriage I had spent 7 years building. Because it didn't happen in that one moment. It happened over 8 months of Saturdays I never once thought to question, until a crayon drawing finally forced me to. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34. I work as a marketing director for a regional healthcare network, the kind of job that trains you to read a room and a spreadsheet with equal attention, to notice the version of a story someone is telling you and the version the numbers underneath it actually support. I mention this because it matters to what came after. I have spent my career noticing the gap between what people say and what the evidence says. I just never thought I'd need that particular skill inside my own marriage. I met Ryan when I was 26 at a mutual friend's engagement party, back when he was 3 years into a modest architecture career and still sketching renderings on cocktail napkins because he said good ideas didn't wait for a proper desk. I loved that about him instantly. The restless, hungry ambition of a man who genuinely believed he was going to build something that mattered. We married 2 years later, and when my father died unexpectedly the same spring Ryan decided to leave his firm and start his own, I used a significant portion of my inheritance, nearly $200,000, to help him do it. It wasn't a gift. My father had raised me to be careful with money even in grief, and at my insistence, Ryan's lawyer drew up formal paperwork, a combination loan and equity stake that made me, on paper, a 40% owner of Dawson Architecture from the very first day the business existed. Ryan used to joke in those early years that I was the only investor who also had to sleep next to him every night. I used to think that was the sweetest arrangement in the world, the two of us building something together from both directions at once. The firm grew steadily over the next 4 years, slower than Ryan wanted but faster than most new practices manage, and with that growth came the thing that grows alongside every small business owner's ambition: longer hours, later nights, weekends that used to belong to us slowly migrating onto his desk instead. I didn't resent it exactly, not at first. I had watched my own father build a small accounting practice from nothing when I was young, and I understood, in a way that felt almost inherited, that the early years of something worth building are rarely gentle on the people closest to the person building it. I told myself this was simply the season we were in, the way you tell yourself almost anything when you love someone and want the story to still make sense. Lily was born the year the firm turned 2, and if anything, motherhood made me more forgiving of Ryan's hours rather than less, because I understood better than ever how much exhaustion a person can be carrying while still trying to show up as a father in whatever windows of time remained. He was good with her in those windows, genuinely good, reading to her before bed on the nights he made it home in time, building elaborate blanket forts on Sunday mornings, the kind of father who made every minute he had with her count even as those minutes grew steadily scarcer across the years. I want to tell you about the year the firm nearly failed because I think it explains more about the shape of our marriage than almost anything that came easily. 18 months in, Ryan lost a large commercial client he'd been counting on to carry the practice through its first slow winter, and for nearly 4 months, we lived off my salary alone while he worked 7 days a week trying to rebuild a pipeline that had collapsed almost overnight. I never once made him feel like a failure during those months, even on the nights he came home too discouraged to talk. Even on the weekend, he missed my own sister's wedding shower because a client meeting had finally, desperately come through. I told myself, watching him pour everything he had into saving something we'd built together, that this was exactly the kind of season a good marriage was supposed to weather without keeping score. I still believe that in the abstract. I just didn't yet understand how much of the scorekeeping I was quietly doing anyway, filing away every missed dinner and canceled weekend as an investment I fully expected to see return to us eventually, together. The firm recovered, slowly, and by its third year it had become the steady, respectable practice Ryan had always pictured. For employees, a modest but growing client list, a reputation in our small city for clean, thoughtful residential design. I remember watching him walk into a room full of his own employees at the firm's third anniversary party, genuinely proud in a way that felt uncomplicated, like all those early sacrifices had finally, tangibly paid off for both of us. I didn't yet know that the exact same year everything finally felt stable was the year the distance between us had grown quiet enough to stop registering as distance at all, and had simply started to feel, instead, like the normal temperature of a marriage that worked. About 8 months before that drawing came home, Ryan suggested something that, at the time, felt like exactly the kind of thoughtful compromise a busy father makes when he's trying to protect a relationship with his daughter from his own overloaded schedule. He proposed taking Lily into the office with him on Saturday mornings, just the two of them, so I could have a few uninterrupted hours to myself for the first time in longer than I could remember, and so he could still get several hours of work done while she colored at the drafting table or watched cartoons on the office television in the small break room. I remember how touched I was by the idea, how it seemed to solve two problems at once, my exhaustion and his guilt, in one simple gesture. I said yes almost immediately. I never once, in 8 months of Saturday mornings, asked to come along, or asked more than the most surface-level questions about how those mornings actually went. I want to be honest about something here because I think it matters to the rest of this story. Those Saturday mornings became, over 8 months, the thing that let our marriage feel functional even as the rest of the week grew thinner and thinner between us. I used those hours to catch up on sleep, to see my sister, to simply exist without being needed by anyone for a little while, and I was grateful for them in a way that made me reluctant to look at them too closely. I understand now that gratitude and blindness sometimes were the exact same expression, and that I spent 8 months mistaking relief for peace of mind. The drawing itself came from a kindergarten assignment called My Family, the kind every classroom seems to do at the start of the school year, a simple exercise meant to help a new teacher learn who's waiting at home for each small face in her classroom. Lily's teacher, a warm, careful woman named Mrs. Ibarra, mentioned to me at pickup, almost in passing, how sweet it was that Lily had drawn her father's co-worker into the picture too, said with the same easy fondness you'd use describing a child who'd drawn the family dog a little too large. I laughed along with her in a moment, the automatic laugh you give when you don't yet understand what you're actually being told, and it wasn't until I unfolded the drawing myself in the car 5 minutes later that the shape of what Mrs. Ibarra had actually said started to catch up with me. There were 4 figures on that page, drawn the careful, lopsided way 5-year-olds draw the people who matter most to them, oversized heads, careful attention to hair color, stick arms reaching toward each other in the specific configuration children use to show you who belongs together. Me on one side, my brown hair scribbled in careful loops. Ryan on the other, his glasses drawn as 2 blue circles the way Lily always draws them. Lily herself in the middle, small and triumphant, the way children draw themselves at the center of every world they make. And a 4th figure, standing close beside Ryan, red crayon hair, a purple dress, close enough in the drawing that her stick hand was touching his. I asked Lily who that was, keeping my voice as light and unremarkable as I could manage, the way you learn to ask a child something important without letting your own face give away how important it actually is. She told me, without a single beat of hesitation, that it was Miss Sarah, Daddy's friend from the office, and that Miss Sarah sleeps at Daddy's office when Lily visits on Saturdays. I asked her, still keeping my voice easy, whether Miss Sarah worked there too. Lily nodded and said yes. She draws the pretty houses like Daddy does, and then, unprompted, in the specific matter-of-fact way children offer up details adults would never think to ask for, she added that Miss Sarah made them pancakes shaped like stars last Saturday, and that sometimes Daddy and Miss Sarah go into the back room to talk about grown-up things while Lily watches her shows. I stood there for a long moment after Lily's answer, still holding the drawing in one hand and her small backpack in the other, watching other parents move past us toward their own cars in the ordinary rush of a Tuesday afternoon pickup, none of them aware that the ground had just shifted under a woman standing perfectly still 6 feet away from them. A father I recognized vaguely from the class list waved at me on his way past, and I remember waving back automatically, my face apparently arranging itself into something normal enough that he didn't stop, didn't ask if I was all right, didn't notice anything at all. I've thought since about how much devastation a person can carry in complete silence through a school parking lot on an ordinary weekday afternoon, how easily the whole architecture of a life can quietly collapse while everyone around you continues discussing carpool schedules and soccer registration. I did not cry in that pickup line. I want you to understand that clearly because I think it matters to everything that came after. Something in me went very still instead, the specific, cold stillness that comes right before you understand a piece of information is about to reorganize your entire life, and I simply folded the drawing carefully along its original creases, put it back in Lily's backpack, and drove us home like it was any other Tuesday. I didn't confront Ryan that night. I want to be honest about why, because I think the reason matters. I have spent enough of my career watching people jump to conclusions off a single data point to know that a 5-year-old's account of a Saturday morning, however specific, is not the same thing as proof, and some old, careful, methodical part of me refused to let this become a screaming match built on a misunderstanding I hadn't fully confirmed yet. I told myself I needed to understand the full shape of it first, the way I would with any other piece of evidence that didn't yet add up to something certain. Over the following week, I asked Lily gentle, careful, non-leading questions whenever the subject came up naturally, never pushing, never suggesting an answer, simply letting her fill in details the way children do when they don't yet understand they're being asked to testify about something. I want to describe one of those conversations specifically because I think it captures something about how impossible it is to fully protect a child from carrying information they don't understand the weight of. One night, folding laundry together on her bedroom floor, Lily mentioned, entirely without prompting, that Miss Sarah had cried once, a few Saturdays back, and that Daddy had hugged her for a long time in the back room while Lily waited outside the door with her coloring book because Daddy said grown-ups sometimes needed a minute alone. I kept folding the same small sock over and over, my hand steady in a way the rest of me wasn't, and asked, as lightly as I could manage, whether Lily knew why Miss Sarah had been sad. She shrugged the specific, unbothered shrug of a 5-year-old who has already moved emotionally past something an adult is still stuck inside of, and said she didn't know, but that Daddy seemed sad about it too sometimes, especially on the drive home. I learned, across 4 or 5 small conversations spread out over meals and bath time and the quiet minutes before bed, that Miss Sarah had a toothbrush in the office bathroom, purple, the same color as Lily's own. I learned that Miss Sarah sometimes wore Daddy's sweatshirt in the mornings because the office got cold. I learned that the back room Lily mentioned had a bed in it now, a real one, not just the office couch that used to be there, because Lily had napped on it once when she got tired before lunch. Each detail landed like a separate, smaller version of the same blow, until by the following Sunday, I had assembled, without a single accusation spoken out loud, a picture I could no longer explain away as an innocent misunderstanding. I want to tell you what I did next because I think it's the part of this story that surprised even me. I didn't wait for Ryan to come home and confront him across our kitchen table the way some part of me wanted to. Instead, I used the one piece of leverage I had built into our marriage almost by accident 4 years earlier, the formal investment paperwork my father's careful instincts had insisted on when I first funded Ryan's firm. As a 40% owner of Dawson Architecture, I had standing access to the company's financial records, an arrangement Ryan had always treated as a formality neither of us ever actually exercised. That Monday, while Lily was at school, I logged into the company's accounting software for the first time in nearly 2 years and started reading. What I found, laid out in the same plain, unmistakable language every set of company books eventually offers up to anyone willing to actually look, was a series of expenditures over the previous 10 months coded to a line item called office improvements, totaling just over $31,000. A renovation of the small storage room behind the main studio into what the invoices described as a private client consultation suite, complete with a queen bed, a dresser, new flooring, and a bathroom fixture upgrade that had nothing to do with consulting anyone about anything. Buried further down, a monthly furniture rental charge I didn't recognize and payroll records showing a junior architect named Sarah Whitfield, hired 14 months earlier, whose salary had been quietly increased twice in the past year, each raise landing suspiciously close to a milestone in the timeline Lily's careful, unwitting testimony had already sketched out for me. I want to walk through exactly how I found it, because the process matters as much as the discovery itself. I started with the general ledger, scrolling back 18 months out of habit more than suspicion, looking first at nothing more specific than the overall health of a business I still, on some level, thought of as partly my own. It was the recurring monthly charge that caught my attention first, a furniture rental company I didn't recognize billing the firm $240 every month, beginning almost exactly 10 months earlier. I clicked into the vendor detail out of simple curiosity, expecting drafting equipment or office chairs, and found instead an itemized description that included a queen mattress, a dresser, and matching nightstands, delivered to the firm's address rather than any client site. From there, the rest of it unraveled the way a single loose thread always does once you finally decide to pull on it. I searched the renovation line item next, found the contractor invoices for what had been logged as a client consultation suite, and pulled the actual floor plan attached to the permit application Ryan had filed with the city 8 months earlier, a plan that included a bathroom with a walk-in shower and a closet, neither of which any reasonable client meeting room has ever required. I sat with that discovery for 2 full days before I did anything about it. The way you sit with something devastating while some tired, hopeful part of you keeps waiting for it to resolve into a more innocent explanation than the one staring back at you from the page. It didn't. By Wednesday, I understood with total, forensic certainty that my husband had spent company funds I had a legal 40% stake in, to build a private living space for the woman he was sleeping with, and that our daughter had been spending her Saturday mornings, unknowingly, inside the very center of it. I decided that Wednesday night that I needed to see it myself before I said a single word to Ryan, because some part of me still needed the evidence in front of my own eyes rather than only on a spreadsheet, the way you sometimes need to touch something to fully believe it's real. Saturday morning, instead of using my usual hours to sleep in or see my sister, I told Ryan I had errands to run and would drop Lily at his office myself instead of him picking her up on his way in. He agreed without suspicion, the way a person agrees to something ordinary when they have no idea their ordinary life is about to end. I drove Lily to the office as planned, walked her inside holding her small hand in mine, and there, standing at the small kitchenette in the back corner of the studio, wearing one of Ryan's sweatshirts exactly the way Lily had described, was a woman with red hair pouring orange juice into 2 glasses like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked up when we came in, and I watched her face do the specific, sinking thing a person's face does when they realize in real time exactly who is standing in front of them. I want to describe that studio the way I actually saw it that morning, because I've replayed the details of it more times than I can count since. The drafting tables were arranged the same way they'd always been, Ryan's renderings pinned along the far wall the way they had every time I'd visited over for years, and yet everything about the room felt subtly rearranged, the way a familiar space feels wrong once you understand what's actually been happening inside it. There was a second coffee mug on the drying rack by the small sink, unmistakably not one of the firm's branded ones I remembered from years of client gift orders. There was a cardigan draped over the back of a chair that wasn't mine, and had never been mine. Small, ordinary domestic details, the kind that don't register at all until you already know what you're looking for, and then can't be unseen. Ryan came out of his office a moment later, already mid-sentence about something work-related, and stopped completely when he saw me standing there instead of simply dropping Lily at the door the way I always had. "Claire," he said, and I watched him take in the room, take in Sarah standing frozen by the coffee maker, take in the specific, unmistakable math of the moment adding itself up on his own face. "I want you to understand something about me. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw anything, did not make a scene in front of my own daughter in the middle of that studio. I simply asked Lily to go sit at the small table by the window and finish the coloring book she'd brought, kept my voice light and easy for her sake, and then I turned to my husband and asked him, quietly, how long. He tried, in that first minute, to tell me it wasn't what it looked like, the same tired sentence I imagine has been offered up in exactly this configuration 1,000 times before in 1,000 other kitchens and offices, and I simply looked at him and told him I'd already seen the accounting records, the renovation invoices, the raises, and that I would very much appreciate it if he skipped the part where he insulted my intelligence before we got to the part where he told me the truth. Something in his face gave out at that, the specific collapse of a person who understands the lie has run out of road. 10 months, he said finally. It started 10 months ago. I drove Lily home myself that morning, telling her, in the calmest voice I could manage, that Mommy needed her to help pack a special overnight bag for a little adventure, and she chattered happily the whole way about which stuffed animals should come along, blessedly unaware of what her small, honest description of pancakes and a purple toothbrush had just detonated in the middle of her parents' marriage. I called my sister from the car, asked if we could stay with her for a few days, and by that evening, Lily and I were sleeping in my sister's guest room while I lay awake replaying, piece by piece, every Saturday morning I had spent grateful for a few hours to myself, never once understanding what those hours were actually costing. Ryan called 11 times that first night. I didn't answer any of them, not out of spite, but because I understood, from years of managing difficult conversations at work, that nothing useful gets decided in the first raw hours of a discovery like that one. Instead, I spent that night doing something I hadn't expected to be capable of doing so calmly, printing out every financial record I'd found, organizing them chronologically the way I organize a marketing report, building, without quite meaning to, the complete, undeniable shape of exactly what had happened and exactly what it had cost, in dollars and in everything else. What I hadn't fully considered yet, lying awake in my sister's guest room that first night, was that I wasn't the only person with a financial stake in what Ryan had done. Dawson Architecture had two other investors beyond myself, Ryan's own parents, who had put in a smaller but still meaningful sum 4 years earlier to help their son get started, structured, like my own investment, as formal equity rather than a simple gift. They had never exercised their access to the books any more than I had, trusting their son the way parents often trust the version of a story their child gives them. I understood, somewhere around 2 a.m, lying in the dark listening to Lily breathe evenly beside me, that they deserved to see exactly what their son had spent shared company money building, and that the truth was going to reach them whether I delivered it directly or Ryan tried to soften it into something smaller first. I called Ryan's mother, Patricia, the next morning, a woman I had always had a warm, easy relationship with across 7 years of marriage, and asked if she and Ryan's father would be willing to sit down with me that weekend, along with Ryan's business partner Marcus, who held the remaining ownership stake in the firm. I told her only that it concerned the company finances and that it was serious enough to warrant everyone being in the same room together. She agreed without asking too many questions, the particular restraint of a woman who has learned over decades of marriage and motherhood to sense when a conversation is going to be difficult before anyone has said a single word about why. We met the following Saturday, not at the office, but at Patricia and her husband Frank's dining room table, the same table Ryan had grown up eating dinner at, which felt, in a way I hadn't fully planned but didn't regret once I was sitting there, like exactly the right place for this particular conversation to happen. Ryan arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept properly in a week, which, based on what my sister had heard secondhand from a mutual friend, he genuinely hadn't. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, visibly confused about why a routine-sounding financial discussion required his presence on a Saturday afternoon at his partner's parents' house. I laid the documents out on the table the way I would for any other presentation, chronological, labeled, unambiguous. The renovation invoices for the back room, the furniture rental charges, the payroll records showing Sarah Whitfield's 2 raises, each one landing within weeks of a milestone I could now place precisely against the timeline my own daughter had unknowingly given me over a week of gentle bedtime questions. I explained, plainly and without raising my voice, exactly what the money had been used for and exactly how I had come to understand it, starting with a crayon drawing and ending with a Saturday morning standing in a studio kitchenette watching a woman in my husband's sweatshirt pour 2 glasses of orange juice. Patricia's hand went to her mouth partway through, and I watched Frank's face do the same slow, sinking collapse I'd watched on Ryan's own face the week before, the particular expression of a parent understanding, in real time, exactly what their child has done with something they trusted him to handle honestly. Marcus, to his credit, went very quiet and businesslike, the way people do when a personal betrayal suddenly also becomes a legal and financial liability sitting directly across the table from him. "This is company money," he said finally, looking at Ryan rather than at me. "You used company money that isn't just yours, to build an apartment for an affair. Do you understand what that actually exposes all three of us to legally if this ever went further than this table?" Ryan didn't have an answer for that. I watched him sit there, surrounded by his own parents and his business partner, all three of them now looking at him with an expression I imagine he'll remember for a long time, and understood, watching it happen, that I hadn't needed to raise my voice a single time that afternoon for the truth to do all the damage it needed to do entirely on its own. Frank, who had said almost nothing through the entire presentation, finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the particular weight of a man who had built and sold his own small business decades earlier and understood exactly what he was looking at. He asked Ryan, plainly, whether Sarah Whitfield's raises had gone through the normal review process the firm used for every other employee, or whether Ryan had simply approved them himself without discussion. Ryan admitted, quietly, that he'd approved them directly. Frank nodded slowly, the way you nodded a fact that confirms something you'd already suspected but hoped wouldn't turn out to be true, and said, "This isn't just a marriage problem anymore, son. You made a business decision to reward the woman you were sleeping with using money that 3 other people trusted you with. That's not heartbreak. That's a breach of the exact kind of trust one taught you to build a company on." Patricia spoke last. After a long silence, none of the men at that table seemed willing to break first. She turned to me, not to her son, and said, quietly, "I am so sorry, Claire. I watched you build a life with him, and I never once thought to ask what those Saturday mornings actually looked like, because I trusted him the same easy way you did." She reached across the table and took my hand, and I remember that gesture more clearly than almost anything else from that afternoon, because it was the first moment since the drawing came home that someone else in that family had chosen to see the situation from where I was actually standing rather than where it was easiest to stand themselves. There was one conversation in particular, about 6 weeks after that dining room table meeting, that I think mattered more to me than anything Ryan said in the weeks immediately following the discovery itself. Marcus called to tell me the audit had confirmed everything, and to ask, gently, whether I had any interest in taking a more active role in the firm going forward, given how thoroughly I'd already demonstrated I understood the books better than anyone had given me credit for. I told him I'd think about it, and I meant it. There was something quietly satisfying, in the middle of everything else falling apart, about being asked to build rather than simply asked to forgive. I want to also be honest about Sarah, because I've thought about her more than I expected to in the months since. She left the firm within 2 weeks of that meeting, and I never spoke to her directly, not out of restraint exactly, but because I understood, somewhere in that studio the morning I found her pouring orange juice in my husband's sweatshirt, that whatever she was to Ryan, she wasn't actually the center of what had broken. Ryan was still my husband. Ryan was the one who had made every choice that mattered. The renovation, the raises, the 8 months of Saturday mornings he handed our daughter over to a version of his life I didn't know existed. I didn't have the energy left, after everything else, to spend any of it being angry at a woman I'd met exactly once, for 90 seconds, in a kitchenette. I want to be honest about something too, because it feels important to say out loud rather than leave implied. I don't think Ryan set out to become a man capable of this. I think he became one gradually, the way most people become the worst version of themselves, one small, unexamined choice compounding quietly into the next until the distance between the man I married and the man standing in that studio kitchenette had grown too wide to explain away as a single bad decision. I've stopped trying to locate the exact moment it started, because I don't think there was one clean moment. I think there were 100 small ones, each easier to make than the last, and I was simply the last person in the story to find out about any of them. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because I think the honest version matters more than a tidy one. Ryan called me repeatedly over those weeks, showed up at my sister's house twice uninvited before I asked him, firmly, not to come again without calling first, wrote me a long letter I read exactly once and never responded to. He told me, across several of those conversations, that it had started almost by accident. A late night at the office that turned into something neither of them planned, and that it had spiraled somewhere he said he never intended it to go, into raises and a renovated room, and, eventually, into our own daughter unknowingly narrating the whole thing back to me over a bowl of macaroni and cheese. I remember, during one of those calls, asking him directly whether he had ever, even once in those 10 months, considered what it would mean for Lily specifically, not for me, not for the marriage, but for her, to be quietly present inside the center of something he was building behind both of our backs. He was quiet for a long time on the phone before he answered, and when he finally did, his voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it, admitting that he'd told himself, over and over, that she was too young to understand any of it, too young for it to matter. I told him that was exactly the problem. She hadn't needed to understand it to become the one who finally told me the truth. I believed most of what he told me. I want to be honest about that too. I don't think he set out, on some ordinary Tuesday 10 months earlier, to build a second life inside the walls of the business I had helped him start. I think it happened the slow, familiar way these things happen, one late night at a time, until the distance between what he'd built and what he'd promised me had grown too large to cross back over honestly. None of that changed what I decided. I told him, the last time we spoke directly rather than through lawyers, that I understood how it had happened, and that understanding it didn't require me to stay for it. I told him I wasn't interested in becoming a story where the wife eventually finds her way back to forgiving the exact thing that broke her, because I had watched other women do that, watched them explain away a second version of the same betrayal years later, and I didn't trust myself, or him, enough to believe our marriage would end up anywhere different if I gave it that chance. I'm not angry anymore, I told him, which was mostly true by then. But I'm also not staying, and I need you to understand that those two things aren't in conflict with each other. We filed for divorce that fall, and the business side of it turned out to be almost as complicated as the marriage itself. Once Marcus and Ryan's parents understood the full financial picture and insisted, over Ryan's objections, on a formal audit of company funds before anything else moved forward. We filed for divorce that fall, and the business side of it turned out to be almost as complicated as the marriage itself. Once Marcus and Ryan's parents understood the full financial picture and insisted, over Ryan's objections, on a formal audit of company funds before anything else moved forward. The audit took nearly 6 weeks and turned up 2 additional smaller expenses I hadn't caught myself, a weekend hotel charge from early in the affair and a jewelry purchase disguised in the books as a client appreciation gift, neither large enough on their own to have raised flags, but damning together as further proof of exactly how long and how deliberately Ryan had been building a second life inside the walls of a company 3 other people had trusted him to run honestly. Marcus, to his credit, handled the fallout with a kind of steady professionalism I found myself grateful for even in the middle of everything else, restructuring Ryan's role within the firm to include far less unilateral financial authority than he'd previously held, a change Ryan accepted without a single word of protest, which told me, more clearly than anything he said directly to me, exactly how much he understood he'd already lost the standing to argue about anything. I kept my 40% stake in the firm, restructured now as a silent investment with no operational role, a decision that still occasionally strikes me as strange, remaining a business partner, on paper, with a man I no longer speak to except through custody logistics. Ryan agreed to a generous custody and financial arrangement almost without contest, which I've come to understand, the same way I understood his silence during the divorce filing, as close to the only honest apology he was ever actually capable of giving me. Lily is 6 now, and she doesn't remember most of it, the way young children mercifully tend to forget the specific mechanics of things that happened around them rather than to them. She still sees her father every other weekend, though not, at my insistence, at the office anymore, a boundary Ryan agreed to without argument once I explained why it mattered. She mentioned Miss Sarah exactly once, months later, asking, with the same easy, unguarded curiosity she asks almost everything, whether Miss Sarah still lived at Daddy's office. I told her as gently and honestly as I could manage for a 6-year-old that Miss Sarah didn't work there anymore, and left it at that, the way you leave most things at that age, offering only as much truth as the question actually asked for. She drew another family picture that spring, a different assignment, this one simply called my house. And when she brought it home, I found myself holding my breath slightly before I unfolded it. An old, involuntary flinch I don't think will fully leave me for a while. It showed two houses this time, connected by a long, careful crayon road. One labeled Mommy's house in her careful, backwards-leaning kindergarten print, the other labeled Daddy's house, both drawn with equal care, equal-sized windows, equal suns overhead. There was no fourth figure in either house. I taped it to my refrigerator that night and stood looking at it longer than I probably needed to, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't fully felt since the day the first drawing came home nearly a year earlier. I moved into a small house across town that winter, the first home that has ever belonged entirely to me, and I remember standing in the empty living room the day the movers left, boxes still taped shut around me, waiting for the grief I assumed was supposed to come with losing 7 years of a marriage all at once. It came, eventually, in smaller waves than I expected, mostly late at night, mostly not even about Ryan himself, but about the specific, ordinary future I had once imagined us building together, the one that had quietly stopped being true for 10 months before I ever knew to grieve it. I think about that drawing often now. The crayon figures still creased along the fold lines from the day I put it back in Lily's backpack in a school pickup line. I used to believe, in the first raw days after I found it, that once the truth was fully out in the open, once everyone finally understood exactly what had happened, something in my marriage might still be worth trying to save. I understand now that the drawing itself was never really the thing that broke us. It was simply the first honest witness in 10 months willing to tell me what I'd been too grateful, too tired, too unwilling to look at closely enough to see on my own. I've come to think of that Tuesday afternoon less as the day my marriage ended and more as the day it finally stopped being able to hide, which, looking back, might be the more accurate way to describe most endings like this one, whatever they happen to look like from the outside. I didn't stay to find out whether Ryan could become a different kind of husband than the one those Saturday mornings had quietly revealed him to be. I built something smaller and steadier instead, a home where the only version of our family that gets drawn on the refrigerator now is the true one. If this one hit close to home, I'd honestly love to know whether you think a child's honesty is the kindest kind of truth or the hardest kind to receive. Has something small and unplanned ever handed you a truth you weren't ready for but couldn't unknow once you had it? Type it out below, and while you're there, let me know what part of the world you're watching this from tonight. It always means something to see how far these stories reach. This channel is built on moments exactly like Claire's, the quiet ones where someone finally stops explaining away what's right in front of them. So if this story found you at the right time, go ahead and subscribe, so the next one finds you too. I'm grateful you spent this time with me tonight. Until the next story.